My husband's night shift job doesn't exist, and what he's really doing is so much worse. I was filling out our health insurance paperwork when I noticed the company name didn't match what my husband had told me. For 3 years, Trevor had been leaving for his night shift security job at Meridian Industrial Solutions, coming home at 7 a.m. smelling like coffee and exhaustion. The insurance form listed his employer as Cascade Wellness Center, a name I'd never heard before. I called the number on the form, thinking it was an administrative error. The receptionist who answered said, "Cascade Wellness Center. How may I direct your call?" in a bright, cheerful voice that made my stomach tighten. "Hi, I'm calling to verify employment for Trevor Ashford. He's listed as working there, but I think there might be a mistake." There was typing on the other end. "Trevor Ashford? Yes, he's one of our night attendants. Has been with us for about 3 years now. Is there a problem with his benefits enrollment?" My mouth went dry. Night attendant? What exactly does that position involve? Our night attendants supervise residents during overnight hours, assist with any needs that arise, and ensure facility security. Is there something specific you needed to know about his role? I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking. Residence. Facility. This wasn't a security company. This was some kind of care facility. And Trevor had been lying about where he worked for 3 entire years. When Trevor came home that morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the insurance paperwork spread out in front of me. He walked in with his usual tired smile, setting his keys on the counter. "Morning, babe. You're up early. Everything okay?" "Tell me about Meridian Industrial Solutions," I said, keeping my voice level. His smile faltered for just a second. "What do you mean?" "You know about my job. I watch security monitors, do rounds, make sure the warehouse is secure. Same thing I've been doing." I slid the insurance form across the table. "Then why does this say you work at Cascade Wellness Center?" I called them. "They said you're a night attendant working with residents." "What residents, Trevor?" The color drained from his face. He sat down slowly, not meeting my eyes. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he took a deep breath. "I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how." "Tell me what? That you've been lying about your job for 3 years? Start talking. Right now." He rubbed his face with both hands. Cascade Wellness Center is a residential facility for people with severe developmental disabilities and mental health conditions. I work overnight shifts supervising 12 residents who need 24-hour care. I help them if they have medical emergencies, make sure they take medications, assist them with bathroom needs, and keep them safe if they have behavioral incidents. I stared at him, trying to process this. Why would you lie about that? Why make up an entire fake job at a fake company? Because I was ashamed, he said quietly. When I first took the job, I told you it was security work because I thought you'd look down on me for being a glorified caretaker. My dad always said real men don't do nursing work. It felt embarrassing to admit I was changing adult diapers and cleaning up after people who couldn't function independently. That's ridiculous. I wouldn't have judged you for honest work. But lying for 3 years? Making me believe you were doing something completely different? What else have you lied about? He looked up, his eyes pleading. Nothing else, I swear. Just this. I know it was wrong. I kept meaning to tell you the truth, but the longer it went on, the harder it became. I was afraid of exactly this, you being angry and losing trust in me. I stood up, too furious to sit still. I need you to tell me everything about this job. The real version. No more lies. Over the next hour, Trevor described his actual work at Cascade Wellness Center. He explained that he supervised residents with severe autism, schizophrenia, traumatic brain injuries, and intellectual disabilities. Some were nonverbal. Others had violent outbursts that required physical restraint. Several had medical needs like feeding tubes or seizure medications that had to be administered on precise schedules. There's this one resident, Margaret, who's 63 and has late-stage Alzheimer's, Trevor said. She doesn't remember her own name most nights. Sometimes she thinks I'm her son and cries about wanting to go home. I have to redirect her and keep her calm because if she gets agitated, she'll try to leave the building, and she's a fall risk. He described another resident named Danny, who was 37, but functionally had the mind of a 5-year-old. Danny has these night terrors where he wakes up screaming. I have to go in and comfort him until he calms down. He likes when I read him picture books. Last week, he gave me a drawing he made of us as superheroes. The stories were heartbreaking, and also completely different from anything Trevor had told me about his security job. For 3 years, I'd pictured him sitting in a guard shack watching monitors. The reality was that he was providing intensive care for society's most vulnerable people, work that was physically and emotionally demanding. Why did you think I'd look down on that? I asked, still angry, but also confused. That's important work. It matters. I don't know. My dad used to make fun of my uncle who worked in a nursing home, called it women's work, said it wasn't a real career for a man. I guess I internalized that and felt ashamed. Your dad's opinions are not my opinions, I said firmly, but the lying is a huge problem. What else about your life have you been dishonest about? Nothing, he insisted. I promise. This is the only thing. I wanted to believe him, but trust had been shattered. I told him I needed space to think, and he moved into the guest room. Over the next few days, I started investigating other aspects of Trevor's life, checking for more deceptions. His pay stubs matched the salary range for overnight care facility work. His schedule aligned with what Cascade Wellness Center confirmed when I called again. His work clothes had the facility's logo on them, which I'd somehow never noticed before because he always changed before coming home. But something still felt off. Trevor had always been vague about his coworkers, never inviting them over or mentioning them by name. When I asked about friends from work, he'd deflect and change the subject. I decided to drive to Cascade Wellness Center and see the place for myself. The facility was a large single-story building in an industrial area with high fences and security cameras. A sign out front listed visiting hours and noted that all guests needed to check in at the front desk. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my car in the parking lot watching. At 6:45 a.m., staff started arriving for the day shift. I saw Trevor's car in the lot confirming he really worked there. But then I noticed something strange. A woman walked out of the building at 7 a.m. wearing scrubs identical to Trevor's. She got into a car and Trevor walked out 2 minutes later. They'd timed their exits to avoid being seen together. My suspicions spiked. I followed the woman, keeping several cars back. She drove to a neighborhood about 10 minutes away and pulled into the driveway of a modest house. Before she could get out, I parked behind her, blocking her in. She looked startled when I approached her car window. I knocked and she rolled it down cautiously. "Can I help you? I'm Trevor Ashford's wife. I need you to tell me the truth about what's going on at Cascade Wellness Center." Her face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. You work with Trevor. I just saw you both leave at the same time, but you made sure not to walk out together. What's he hiding? Is he having an affair? Is there something illegal happening at that facility?" She got out of the car, glancing around nervously. "Look, I can't talk about this here. My husband's inside and he doesn't know anything about the situation. Can we meet somewhere else?" We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in an hour. I spent that time spiraling through possibilities. An affair seemed most likely, but why would this woman be so scared if it was just infidelity? When she arrived at the coffee shop, she sat down across from me with a grim expression. "My name is Bianca. I've worked at Cascade for 5 years. Trevor's a good guy, and what he's doing isn't illegal exactly, but it's definitely not what the administration would approve of." "Just tell me," I said, bracing myself. Bianca took a deep breath. "There are 12 residents in the unit Trevor works, but there used to be 13. 6 months ago, one of the residents, a man named Keith, died. He had a heart attack during the night shift. It was sudden, unexpected, and not Trevor's fault at all. The medical examiner confirmed natural causes." "Okay, so someone died. That's tragic, but not a reason to lie to me. That's not the part you need to hear. After Keith died, his bed stayed empty for a few months while the facility looked for a new resident to fill the spot. But then Trevor started bringing someone else into the facility during his shifts, someone who's not an official resident, someone who's been living there secretly for the past 4 months. My mind raced. Who is Trevor bringing into the facility? Why would he do that? Bianca looked uncomfortable. "I only know because I came in early one morning and saw them together. Trevor begged me not to tell anyone. He said if administration found out, he'd lose his job and the person he's helping would end up on the street with nowhere to go." "Who is it, Bianca?" "His brother. Trevor's younger brother, Caleb, has been living in Keith's old room, pretending to be a resident. Trevor brings him in at the start of each shift and sneaks him out before day staff arrives. He feeds him meals from the facility kitchen, lets him shower in the resident bathrooms, and basically gives him a place to live rent-free." I sat back, stunned. Trevor had never mentioned having a brother. In our 5 years together, he'd only talked about his parents, both deceased. No siblings, no extended family. Trevor told me he was an only child. Bianca shook her head. "He has a younger brother with a severe drug addiction. Caleb's been in and out of rehab for years. He's burned every bridge, lost every job, gotten kicked out of every program. Trevor's been trying to help him for as long as I've known them. Why not just tell me? Why hide his brother's existence entirely? I don't know. Maybe shame about the addiction? Maybe fear you'd make him stop helping? All I know is that Trevor's been using the empty bed to give Caleb a safe place to sleep and regular meals. During the overnight shift, nobody from administration is around. The day staff has no idea someone's been sleeping in that room at night. This made a horrifying kind of sense. Trevor's secretiveness, his inability to talk about work in detail, his weird hours, and refusal to let me visit his workplace. He'd been running an elaborate scheme to house his drug addict brother in a medical facility without anyone knowing. Is Caleb dangerous? Could he hurt the actual residents? Bianca considered this. He's never been violent that I've seen. Trevor keeps him in the room most of the time. I've only seen him in the hallways a few times, usually looking pretty out of it. Trevor says he's trying to get Caleb clean, using the structure of the facility schedule to help him detox and stabilize. This is insane. This is fraud. He's stealing from the facility, using their resources for someone who's not authorized to be there. He could go to jail. I know. That's why I haven't reported it. I feel bad for both of them, honestly. Trevor's just trying to save his brother's life, and Caleb seems genuinely grateful for the help. But you're right that it's not sustainable. Eventually, someone will notice. I drove home in a daze, trying to figure out how to confront Trevor about this. He'd lied about his job. He'd hidden the existence of his brother. He'd been committing what amounted to theft and fraud for 4 months. When he woke up that afternoon, I was waiting. Bianca told me about Caleb, I said without preamble. Trevor's face went through several emotions quickly. Shock, fear, resignation. How did you find Bianca? I followed her from work. Now tell me everything. And I mean everything. No more lies. He sat down and put his head in his hands. Caleb's 3 years younger than me. He got into drugs in high school and it spiraled from there. Heroin, meth, pills, anything he could get. Our parents tried everything to help him, spent thousands on rehab programs. Nothing worked. By the time they died, they'd given up on him. Why didn't you ever mention having a brother? Because I was ashamed. My perfect life with you, our nice house, stable jobs. And then there's Caleb, living on the streets, stealing to support his habit. I didn't want you to know that side of my family existed. Trevor explained that, about 6 months ago, Caleb had shown up at his work looking terrible. He'd been living under a bridge, hadn't eaten in days, and was desperate. He begged me for help, said he wanted to get clean but had nowhere safe to stay. All the shelters were full and he'd been banned from most of them anyway for behavioral issues. When Keith died and his bed stayed empty, Trevor had an idea. He started bringing Caleb in during his night shifts, letting him sleep in the empty room and use the facility's resources. I thought it would just be temporary, a few weeks until I could get him into a program, but he's actually doing better. He's been clean for 4 months, longest he's gone in years. The structure and routine are helping him stay sober. Trevor, this is illegal. You're stealing from your employer, using their food, utilities, and space for someone who shouldn't be there. You could lose your job and face criminal charges. I know, but what was I supposed to do? Let him die on the streets? He's my brother, the only family I have left. His voice broke. I've watched him nearly overdose 3 times. I found him unconscious in alleys. If I don't help him, he'll die. I wanted to sympathize, but I was also furious about the deception. You should have told me. We could have figured out something together. Instead, you lied about your job, hid your brother's existence, and committed fraud. What happens when someone at the facility figures it out? Trevor looked defeated. I don't know. I've been trying to get Caleb into a sober living facility, but there's a waiting list. I thought I could buy him a few more months until a spot opened up. Every day he stays clean is a day he's not dying. I spent the next week researching addiction resources and sober living facilities. Trevor was right that waitlists were long and expensive. Most programs cost thousands of dollars per month, money we didn't have. But I also contacted a social worker who specialized in addiction cases, explaining the situation without revealing where Caleb was currently staying. She gave me a list of low-cost and free resources, including a pilot program for people trying to transition off the streets. I presented this information to Trevor. You need to get Caleb out of the facility before you get caught, but I'll help you find him a legitimate place to stay. No more lies, no more illegal schemes. Trevor was emotional, torn between gratitude and fear. What if he relapses without the structure of the facility? What if putting him back on the street is basically killing him? Then we figure out another solution. But keeping him hidden at your work is not sustainable. Eventually, someone will notice. Bianca already knows. How long before she tells someone or before another coworker sees something? That weekend, I finally met Caleb. Trevor brought him to our house during the day, a time when he'd normally be sleeping at the facility. Caleb was thin and pale, with the hollowed-out look of someone who'd spent years abusing drugs, but he was sober and coherent, and clearly grateful for what Trevor had been doing. I know this whole situation is messed up, Caleb said, sitting awkwardly on our couch. Trevor's been taking huge risks for me. I'm trying to get better, I really am. But it's hard when the whole world tells you you're worthless, and there's no help available unless you have money. I asked him about his addiction history and what had led him to the streets. He talked about his first time using pills after a sports injury in high school, how it had felt like the answer to all his anxiety and depression. By the time I realized I was addicted, it was too late. I'd already burned through my parents' money and their patience. Trevor was the only one who didn't give up on me. Over the next few weeks, I worked with the social worker to get Caleb into the pilot program for transitional housing. It required him to attend daily NA meetings, meet with a counselor 3 times a week, and submit to random drug tests. In exchange, he'd get a bed in a shared apartment with other men in recovery and job training to help him become self-sufficient. The day came when Caleb had to stop staying at the facility. Trevor was terrified he'd relapse immediately without the structure and safety net. We met Caleb at the facility at 6 a.m., before day shift staff arrived. He gathered his few belongings from Keith's old room, and we drove him to the transitional housing apartment across town. Thank you, Caleb said to both of us, his voice thick with emotion. I know I don't deserve the chances you've given me. I'm going to work hard to prove I can do this. Trevor hugged his brother, and I saw tears in his eyes. You call me if you need anything, and you show up to every meeting and counseling session. This is your shot, Caleb. Don't waste it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the administration at Cascade Wellness Center. They'd reviewed security footage from the past several months as part of a routine audit and noticed anomalies. Someone had been entering and leaving Keith's old room during night shifts, someone who wasn't staff or an official resident. Mrs. Ashford, we need to speak with your husband about unauthorized individuals being on the premises. This is a serious security breach and potential fraud issue. We're asking Trevor to come in for a meeting with our director and legal team. I called Trevor immediately. They found out. Security footage showed Caleb. They want you to come in for a meeting. He went pale. This is it. I'm going to lose my job. Might face criminal charges. God, I've been so stupid. I went with him to the meeting, where the facility director and a lawyer questioned Trevor extensively about why he'd brought an unauthorized person into the building and used facility resources without permission. Trevor didn't deny anything. He explained about Caleb's addiction, his desperation to help his brother, and his misguided decision to use the empty bed as a temporary solution. The director was not sympathetic. Mr. Ashford, what you did constitutes theft of services and fraud. You used our food, utilities, and space for someone who had no authorization to be here. You put our actual residents at risk by bringing in an unknown individual with a history of drug addiction. You violated every policy we have about facility security and resident safety. I understand, Trevor said quietly. I'll accept whatever consequences you decide. I just want you to know that Caleb never hurt anyone or caused any problems. He stayed in that room and kept to himself. I made sure the actual residents were always my first priority. The lawyer spoke up. We could pursue criminal charges, theft, fraud, trespassing. You'd likely face jail time and a permanent criminal record. You'd never work in healthcare or any similar field again. Trevor nodded, accepting this. But then the director surprised us. However, we're also aware that you've been an exemplary employee for 3 years. Your performance reviews are excellent. The residents' families speak highly of you. You've never had a single incident or complaint. And frankly, what you did came from a place of compassion, even if it was misguided and illegal. She paused. We're willing to offer a deal. You resign immediately and agree never to seek employment with any of our affiliated facilities. In exchange, we won't pursue criminal charges. You'll leave with a neutral reference that confirms your dates of employment without elaborating on the circumstances of your resignation. It was more mercy than Trevor deserved, and we both knew it. He agreed immediately, signing resignation paperwork that same day. His 3-year career at Cascade Wellness Center ended because of his choice to help his brother through fraud rather than finding legal solutions. Losing his job meant losing our health insurance and a significant portion of our household income. Trevor had to find new work quickly, but his employment options were limited without being able to use his most recent job as a real reference. He ended up taking a position at a warehouse doing overnight inventory checks, actual security-type work with terrible pay and no benefits. Money got tight. We had to cut back on everything, dipping into savings to cover basic bills. I picked up extra freelance work to supplement our income. The stress put a massive strain on our marriage, with resentment building on both sides. I'm trying to forgive you, I told Trevor one night when we were arguing about money again. But you made choices that affected both of us without including me in the decision. You lied for 3 years about your job, hid your brother's existence, committed fraud, and lost your career. How am I supposed to trust you now? I know I messed up, he said, exhausted. I was trying to save Caleb's life, and I made terrible decisions about how to do it. But he's still alive and sober because of what I did. Doesn't that count for something? It counts for something. But it doesn't erase the lies or the consequences we're both dealing with now. We started marriage counseling, working through the betrayal and rebuilding trust. The therapist helped Trevor understand why he'd felt compelled to lie, rather than being honest about his shame and his struggling brother. She helped me work through my anger and figure out how to forgive without forgetting. Meanwhile, Caleb was doing well in the transitional housing program. He attended his NA meetings religiously, passed all his drug tests, and got a part-time job at a grocery store. Trevor visited him twice a week, and I went along sometimes to see his progress. I'm 90 days sober, Caleb told us proudly at one of these visits. Longest I've been clean since I was 16. I wake up every morning grateful that Trevor gave me this chance, even though it cost him his job. That acknowledgement meant something. Caleb understood the sacrifice Trevor had made and was working hard not to waste it. 6 months after Trevor lost his job at Cascade, he found better work as a night supervisor at a distribution center. The pay was close to what he'd been making before, and they offered health insurance after 90 days. We started to recover financially, slowly rebuilding what we'd lost. But more importantly, we were recovering emotionally. Trevor had finally learned to be honest with me about difficult things instead of hiding them out of shame. We talked about Caleb openly, discussing his progress and struggles without pretending everything was fine. I should have told you from the beginning, Trevor admitted during one of our counseling sessions. About my job, about Caleb, about all of it. I thought I was protecting you from things you didn't need to worry about, but I was really just protecting my own ego. And I should have noticed something was off sooner, I said. I accepted your vague answers about work instead of asking harder questions. We both have work to do on communication. A year after the incident, Caleb graduated from the transitional housing program. He'd been sober for 12 months, had a full-time job at the grocery store, and had saved enough money to rent his own small apartment. Trevor and I helped him move in, bringing furniture from thrift stores and cooking his first meal in his new place. I owe you both everything. Caleb said as we ate pizza on his secondhand couch. Trevor literally saved my life by giving me a place to get clean, even though it cost him his career. And you, he looked at me. You didn't have to help me after finding out about all the lies. But you did anyway. I won't forget that. Looking at Caleb now, healthy and stable and hopeful about his future, I could understand why Trevor had taken such risks. Addiction destroys families, and watching someone you love slowly kill themselves through drugs is a special kind of torture. Trevor's methods had been wrong, illegal, and damaging, but his instinct to save his brother had been right. Just stay sober, I told Caleb. That's how you pay us back. By staying alive and building a life worth living. 2 years after discovering Trevor's lies, our marriage was stronger than it had ever been. The crisis had forced us to develop better communication and deeper trust. We'd learned to share difficult truths instead of hiding them. Trevor had learned that shame doesn't protect anyone. We visited Caleb regularly, watching him slowly rebuild relationships and establish routines. He'd been promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store. He'd started dating someone he met at an NA meeting. He'd reconnected with old friends who were also in recovery. Sometimes I think about those 4 months I spent at Cascade, Caleb told us during one visit. Sleeping in that room, following Trevor's overnight schedule, having regular meals and a safe place to detox. It probably saved my life. I'd tried to get clean so many times before, but I always relapsed within days. Having those 4 months of structure and safety gave me the foundation I needed. Trevor looked at me. I know it was wrong. I know I shouldn't have done it that way. But I'm not sorry I helped him. I'm just sorry about the lies and the consequences for everyone else. I understand, I said. And I did. Trevor's actions had been illegal and misguided, but they'd come from a place of desperate love for his brother. He'd been willing to risk everything to save Caleb's life. That kind of devotion, even when expressed through terrible choices, meant something. 3 years after discovering the truth, I was going through our filing cabinet when I found old pay stubs from Trevor's time at Cascade Wellness Center. Looking at them reminded me of that morning when I'd called to verify his employment, the moment everything had unraveled. I thought about how different our life would be if I'd never made that call, if I'd just accepted the paperwork without questioning it. We might still be living in ignorance, with Trevor continuing his double life and escalating the fraud. Eventually, he would have been caught, and the consequences might have been much worse. What are you thinking about? Trevor asked, seeing me with the old pay stubs. Just remembering how scared I was when I found out, how angry, how betrayed I felt. I looked at him, but also how all of it led to Caleb getting the help he needed and us building a more honest relationship. I don't regret finding out, even though it was painful. Neither do I, Trevor said. Living with all those lies was exhausting. Always worrying about keeping stories straight, avoiding your questions, hiding huge parts of my life. Being honest is so much easier, even when the truth is hard. That night, we had dinner with Caleb at his apartment. He'd cooked for us, a simple meal, but prepared with care. He'd been sober for 3 years now, working full-time, building a life that looked ordinary and unremarkable but was actually extraordinary, given where he'd started. I think about how close I came to dying on the streets, Caleb said during dinner. If Trevor hadn't taken that risk, if he hadn't given me those 4 months to get stable, I'd probably be dead. I know what he did was illegal. I know it caused problems for your marriage and his career. But it gave me a chance I wouldn't have had otherwise. Looking at Caleb now, healthy and alive, it was hard to regret Trevor's choice completely. Yes, the lies had been wrong. The fraud had been criminal. The deception had damaged our marriage. But the alternative might have been Caleb dead of an overdose in some alley, with Trevor living with the guilt of not doing enough to save him. I'm glad you're alive, I told Caleb. I'm glad Trevor found a way to help you, even if his method was flawed. But I'm also glad he's learned that honesty is better than deception, even when honesty is scary. Trevor raised his glass. To second chances and hard lessons. We drank to that, knowing how close we'd all come to much worse outcomes. The story could have ended with Caleb dead, Trevor in jail, and our marriage destroyed. Instead, we'd all survived and grown, learning difficult lessons about love, sacrifice, honesty, and the complicated choices people make when they're desperate to save someone they care about. 4 years after finding out about Trevor's lies, I got a call from Bianca, the coworker who'd first told me about Caleb. We'd stayed in occasional contact, and she'd been following Caleb's recovery progress through Trevor. I thought you should know, she said. Cascade Wellness Center is being featured in a news story about their innovative programs for helping families of residents with addiction issues. The director mentioned that staff's dedication to helping vulnerable populations sometimes extends beyond their official duties. I smiled, understanding the subtext. The facility had learned something from Trevor's situation, even if they'd never acknowledge it publicly. They'd started programs to help families struggling with addiction, recognizing that their staff often dealt with these issues in their personal lives. How's everything there? I asked Bianca. Good. They finally filled Keith's old room with an actual resident. Every time I walk past, I think about those 4 months when Caleb was hiding in there. It seems like something from a different lifetime now. It did feel like a different lifetime. The people we'd been 4 years ago, keeping secrets and living parallel lives, weren't who we were anymore. We'd been forced to confront hard truths and make difficult changes. The process had been painful, but it had made us stronger. That night, I told Trevor about Bianca's call. Do you ever miss working at Cascade? The actual work with the residents? Sometimes, he admitted. I was good at that job. I cared about those people and made a real difference in their lives. But I couldn't have kept lying to you indefinitely. Eventually, the whole thing would have collapsed, and the consequences would have been worse. Better that it ended when it did, even though losing that job was devastating at the time. 5 years after discovering Trevor's deception, we threw a party for Caleb's 5-year sobriety anniversary. The milestone felt significant, a marker of how far he'd come from the desperate addict sleeping in a medical facility room to the stable, employed, sober person he was now. Friends from his NA group came. His girlfriend was there. Trevor's co-workers from the distribution center showed up. Even Bianca came, bringing a card signed by several former Cascade employees who remembered Trevor fondly, despite how he'd left. 5 years, Caleb said in a short speech to everyone gathered. 5 years since Trevor gave me a chance I didn't deserve. 5 years since he risked everything to help me get clean. I know what he did was illegal. I know it caused problems. But I wouldn't be here without those 4 months of safety and structure that let me finally break the cycle. He looked at me. And I wouldn't have made it this far without my sister-in-law believing I was worth a second chance, even after finding out about all the lies. You didn't have to help me, but you did. That meant everything. I realized that Caleb was my family now. Not just Trevor's brother, but someone I'd invested in and cared about. His sobriety was something we'd all fought for together, in our different ways. His survival and success felt like a shared victory. Looking back on everything that had happened, from that first confusing phone call to Cascade Wellness Center, to this moment celebrating 5 years of sobriety, I could see how our family had been forged through crisis. Trevor's lies had nearly destroyed us, but they'd also revealed his capacity for sacrifice and devotion. My discovery of the truth had been painful, but it had forced us to build a more honest foundation. Caleb's addiction had devastated him, but his recovery had shown incredible strength. I'm proud of all of us, I said during the party, for surviving something that could have ended so much worse, for choosing honesty over deception, even when honesty was harder, for staying committed to each other through really difficult circumstances. That night, after everyone had gone home, Trevor and I sat together on our back porch. 5 years earlier, I'd been sitting in the kitchen discovering his lies. Now, 5 years later, we'd built something more authentic and resilient than what we'd had before. Do you think about how differently things could have gone? Trevor asked. If you hadn't found out when you did? If Cascade had discovered Caleb before we got him into the program? Sometimes. But I try not to dwell on the what-ifs. We made it through. Caleb's alive and sober. Our marriage is stronger. Those are the facts that matter. Trevor took my hand. Thank you for not giving up on me when you found out. I know I didn't deserve your patience or help, but you gave it anyway. And that made all the difference. 6 years after discovering the truth, Trevor got an unexpected call from the director at Cascade Wellness Center. The facility was expanding their night shift staff and wondered if he'd be interested in returning to work there. We've thought a lot about your situation over the years, the director said during a phone call that Trevor put on speaker so I could hear. What you did was wrong, and we can't excuse it. But we understand now that you were dealing with an impossible situation and made bad choices out of love for your brother. We've also heard about your brother's successful recovery and wanted to acknowledge that your intervention, despite being illegal, ultimately saved his life. Trevor was stunned. Are you offering me a job? We're offering you the chance to reapply. You'd have to go through the full interview process and reference checks. We can't guarantee anything. But if you're interested in returning to care work, we'd like to consider you. Trevor looked at me, silently asking what I thought. I considered it carefully. Do you want to go back to that kind of work? I think I do, he said slowly. I've missed working with residents. The warehouse job pays the bills, but it doesn't feel meaningful. At Cascade, I was making a real difference in people's lives. I'd like to have that again if possible. He reapplied and went through multiple interviews. They checked his references from before the incident, contacted his current warehouse employer, and had him complete new background checks. 3 months later, they offered him a position on the night shift, not in the same unit where he'd worked before, but in a different building with different residents. We're giving you a second chance, the director said when she made the offer. Don't make us regret it. And if you ever face a situation where you're tempted to bend rules to help someone, come talk to us first. We have resources and programs that might be able to help, legitimately. You don't have to break the law. Trevor accepted gratefully and started his new position the following month. Coming home from his first shift back, he looked more energized than I'd seen in years. There's this resident named Patricia, he told me. She's 81 and has advanced dementia. Tonight, she kept asking me to help her find her mother. I sat with her and looked at old photo albums until she calmed down. It felt good to be doing that kind of work again. 7 years after discovering Trevor's lies about his job, our life had found a new equilibrium. Trevor was back in care work, doing a job he loved and excelled at. Caleb was 7 years sober, had gotten married, and was managing the grocery store where he'd started as a stockroom clerk. Our marriage had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Sometimes people asked how we'd moved past Trevor's deception. The answer was complicated. We'd moved past it through honesty, therapy, hard work, and time. Through choosing to forgive without forgetting. Through understanding that people make terrible choices when they're desperate, but those choices don't have to define them forever. I think about that insurance form sometimes, I told Trevor one evening. If I hadn't needed to fill it out, if I hadn't called to verify your employment, we might still be living in that web of lies. Or it might have exploded in some worse way years later. I think about it too, Trevor said. Part of me wishes you'd never found out, that I could have kept the secret forever. But most of me is grateful you did. Living with all those lies was slowly destroying me. Getting caught forced me to face things I'd been avoiding for years. 8 years after the initial discovery, Caleb and his wife announced they were expecting their first child. The news felt significant. A new generation being born into a family that had been through so much. I never thought I'd live long enough to be a father, Caleb said when he told us. When I was using, I couldn't imagine a future at all. Now I'm going to have a son. It's overwhelming. We threw them a baby shower, inviting friends from their NA meetings and family members who'd reconnected with Caleb over the years. Trevor gave a speech about second chances and redemption, about how the nephew they were about to meet wouldn't exist without the choices they'd all made 8 years ago. Looking around the room at everyone celebrating, I thought about the complicated journey that had brought us here. Trevor's lies, my discovery, Caleb's addiction and recovery, the lost job and the found purpose, the broken trust and the rebuilt marriage. All of it had been necessary in some strange way to create the family we'd become. When Caleb's son was born 3 months later, they named him Trevor Keith, honoring both his uncle and the resident, whose empty bed had given Caleb a place to heal. Holding baby Trevor in my arms, I felt the weight of everything we'd been through and everything we'd survived. He's perfect, I said, looking at Caleb and Trevor standing together. He's proof that good things can come from terrible situations, that people can change and grow. That family is worth fighting for, even when the fight is messy and complicated. Trevor put his arm around me. Thank you for fighting for us. For not giving up when you found out about everything. For helping Caleb when you didn't have to. For rebuilding trust with me even though I'd shattered it. None of this would exist without you choosing to stay. 9 years after discovering Trevor's night shift job didn't exist, I could finally look back on the entire experience with something approaching peace. The lies had hurt. The betrayal had been devastating. The consequences had been severe. But we'd survived. More than survived, we'd grown. We'd learned that honesty, even when terrifying, is better than deception. That love sometimes means taking enormous risks. That families are messy and complicated but worth the effort. And that what seems like the worst thing that could happen can sometimes lead to the best outcomes, if you're willing to do the hard work of healing. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.